Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint podcast. Big announcement right up front. Mandarin Blueprint has started a GoFundMe campaign for our advanced course. And I wanted to just alert you guys to it. There are links right below at the beginning of the show notes to donate if you'd like. There's one for GoFundMe and there's also one for a PayPal donation link. And why are we doing this? Well, Mandarin Blueprint, we're doing pretty well for an online course, but it's quite difficult to get to the point where you can focus all of your energies on something that isn't going to have an immediate return. There's sort of a reality to an online business, which is that, if you want to keep your employees happy and, keep having the option to give people a better living wage and all of that, you need to constantly be focusing on getting in new customers and new sales. And we're not at the point yet where we're super thriving in that department. We're doing okay, but not enough so that we can say, focus all our energy on a course that will ultimately not really pay its returns for maybe a couple of years. An advanced course requires people to get quite a far way into the course before they can even get the benefit from it. So it's the kind of thing where we definitely want to do it, but we need a little bit of help from the people on the course who are very interested in us finishing the advanced course in order to justify the time spent on the course itself. So we've set up a GoFundMe and you can check out the details below. I won't go too much into it here other than just to say that if you are interested in getting the advanced course sooner rather than later, then head over there and make a donation. And of course, only donations from people who it is not a financial burden to do so. We're not interested in trying to get people to feel any extra burden financially. And if things are tight at the moment, don't worry about it. Just keep enjoying the course. But if you are in a position where you'd like to see the advanced course come out faster and you'd like us to be able to focus our energies on that as opposed to sort of the short and medium term sales projects, then head over there and you can make a donation either via the GoFundMe page or via PayPal. So that's the announcement we have right up front. Let's get into the podcast this week, which is, of course, one of the great things about the Mandarin Blueprint podcast is that you guys provide such good questions that it ends up being this virtuous circle of, areas where we can find the weaknesses in the course and improve upon them just by you guys asking questions at the precise moment that it's necessary. The reason the Mandarin Blueprint course is so much better than your average Chinese course is because it's alive. You guys are constantly asking questions and it's at that perfect moment. There's two things really. It's not just that it's alive. It's that the order of the characters allows for us to know, exactly this many characters, exactly this many words at level 7 or at level 55. And so when you're asking a question, it's highly relevant. If you don't have the understanding of how a sentence works or how this character is understood or how an individual word works, and then you ask a question, it gives us the perfect understanding of where we need to make a slight adjustment or improvement. And then in many cases, it's also hugely encouraging to the people who are on the course when they see so much success. So let's start off the comments this week with a small success, but I think it's quite a good one, from Kate Gans on the community forum. She says, I came across the character ba while reading Harry Potter today. The component for illness and the character for crust, ba, combined to create scar. So this is a great example of a phonetic semantic compound. So what she's probably referring to is Harry's shangba on his forehead, and the ba, why is it pronounced ba? Well, because it has underneath the illness component the character for ba, which means crust, and that's the phonetic component of this character. That's the part that gives you a clue as to what the pronunciation is. A lot of people think that Chinese has no phonetic element to it, but it's not true. There are phonetic clues. Now, they're not as objective as, say, the phonetic rules in Spanish. I think that there's always this joke that people who are native Spanish speakers make fun of native English speakers for having a spelling bee because Spanish's rules are consistent. So the idea of having a spelling bee would be silly. Everybody would know, everybody would pass it, right? And so it's not as objective, but it's a clue. And in this case, it happens to be the exact same pronunciation. You've got ba meaning crust, and you've got ba meaning scar. Then you have the semantic component, which is the illness component or the somewhat of a bodily defect component, and that's what a scar is. It's an element of the body that is not as it theoretically should be, so therefore it gets the illness slash bodily defect component. That gives you a clue to the meaning. So you have the clue for the pronunciation in the lower part, ba, and then you have the clue for the meaning in the illness component. So it's pretty cool how you can come to understand different characters even when you haven't learned them yet. So that's pretty neat. Next, we have Anne Giles on Yang in context. She says, intelligent, informed, articulate commentary on why we need to be able to communicate with each other. Seeing our world in terms of civilizations rather than nations is a significant contribution to my thinking on the state of things. Thank you, Phil. So, yeah, this is kind of an interesting way to view the world. Lately, the interaction between China and the West has been fraught. And where to place the blame on that is pretty complicated. It's there's many varying factors on why there are tensions between our countries. But then whenever I say that word, like there's tension between the nations, it doesn't feel right, because China doesn't really feel like a nation, as it were. It feels more like a civilization because the history is so deep in this area. There have been many changes in power. There have been many invasions and internal conflicts and civil wars and things that have really built up what this place is for good, for better, and for worse. And so what that means is that, China's not going away. The concept of China is deeper than even what the government is at the moment. So even if the government switched to another regime, it would still be China. The China part is not going away. So one of the things that we need to think about when we're talking about making the world safer is better communication between civilizations. And if you think of it like that, it's deeper, you're more inclined to recognize that there is wisdom to be gained from understanding this different civilization. And, humans are a mix of many different good and bad things. We have sort of our compassionate and caring sides, but we also have our very vengeful and malevolent sides. We're, as Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs down every man's heart. And it's just as true in China as it is anywhere else. And we would be fools to not delve into understanding of what these different places are like. Much of the differences between our different civilizations are related to culture, but sometimes they're just related to geography. Sometimes it's just like, well, here, I live in the Sichuan Basin, which is a particularly unique geographical situation. And I've discovered that Chengdu folks are quite friendly. They're very welcoming. And, you wonder, why might that be? Well, some of it's cultural, but then some of it might just be geographical. It's a fairly fortified place. To the west, you've got the Himalayas. So you've got a bunch of fresh water that just pours right into the city. As the snow melts, it gets into the rivers and it goes right into the city. So the source of fresh water is very close, which can be a very that's a surprisingly relevant factor to how a country develops, because if you don't have enough water, then that's the type of thing that people have conflict over. So they have plenty of water, plenty of arable land in this area, and it's quite far inland, so it's not very easy for foreign invaders to get to. So if you imagine that you have a land of abundance, you have lots of water, lots of places to plant food, and then it's not that easily invaded, well, why not be welcoming? It's very unlikely that the person who you're welcoming is going to end up being a terrible invader. So that's an example of where geography ends up being the reason why something works out, and people end up behaving in a way that is more on the good side of the spectrum because they just happen to have great geography. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the United States of America is so successful. It's got an incredibly blessed geographical situation. The Mississippi River beds and the various tributaries cover such a huge swath of the nation, provide huge amounts of arable land, and they're navigable by boat. So it's one of those things that, and of course the United States has two oceans on both sides of it and friendly neighbors to the north and south. So it's no wonder that they've been so successful when you look at the geography. And so a lot of times when people are talking about the differences between our countries and the differences between our civilizations, there's just there's so much left to plumb from this relationship. And that's why Mandarin Blueprint's here. We're trying to help bridge that gap of communication. And, Chinese people are really working hard to learn English. They're really working hard to emulate a lot of what Western civilization has to offer. We should be taking the time to understand China more deeply. And again, you don't have to like China for that to be a wise decision. You could even think that China is the biggest threat to the world today. That's a very debatable point, but maybe that's your position. And if that's what you think, learn Chinese. I guarantee you will not regret that particular decision. And so, and of course, there's also all of the deeper religious elements to things. There are religions that come out of China, whether it be Taoism or Buddhism or like the more pseudo religions like legalism, where if you really look into them, you'll find that there is certainly wisdom to be found and areas where you can improve your own personal outlook on life just by understanding more of what's going on in China. And learning Mandarin is one of the first steps to getting there. So thanks to Anne for bringing that up. And, we have to understand each other. It's like of critical importance for the world's safety, for the West and China. I mean, imagine if the West and China can get onto the same page, or at least a lot more on the same page, then the risk of conflict internationally goes way down. So we could try to rely on governments to do that, but since when has that been usually a highly effective technique? It's better if we as individuals become better aware of the situation. And of course, the West being mostly democratic, if individuals manage to understand more about China, then hopefully the politicians would recognize that their constituents are more educated on the topic. Big ideas and, of course, high goals and high hopes. But then again, if you don't set your goals high, then you won't even come close to reaching them. Kevin Lee on Vocab Unlocked from Chang, which is also pronounced Zhang. And we have Zhang Da, Zhang Xiang, and Zhang De. He says, okay, so I need some explanation on this one. For character 267, Chang, we use a CH pinyin initial, but in all the Vocab Unlocked, we use the ZH pinyin initial. Did I miss something? Is there a reason we use the CH initial for the character, but not for any of the Vocab Unlocked? You did miss something, Kevin, because in the Chang Make a Movie lesson, we talked about how you can make a movie that involves both your CH and your ZH actor, because this is a kind of special character. Why? Because in the Mandarin Blueprint method, we cover the primary meaning and the primary pronunciation. Now, about 20% of all characters have an alternate pronunciation, but of those 20%, very few of them have an alternate pronunciation that's also very high frequency. But in this character's case, they do. You have Chang, which is an adjective meaning long. Of course, like long versus short. Of course, you're going to have a lot of instances where you need to say long when you're describing something. But it also is a verb meaning to grow, zhang. So zhang da, grow until you're big, zhang da. So that's grow up. Your zhang xiang, your appearance as you've grown. So like your zhang xiang is kind of like how you appear on the outside. And then zhang de is to grow into something. It's actually zhang de is not really a word in and of itself. It's just a verb plus the secondary de, which indicates zhang de怎么样, like how did you grow into something, like, zhang de shuai. He grew to be handsome. So like when he was a little baby, probably not that handsome, but then he grew, zhang de, and then into what? Chou, ugly, or zhang de shuai, handsome, or zhang de mei, beautiful, or zhang de chang, meaning grew to be long, for example. And so that's what's going on with this character. It has two very common meanings. The one that's slightly more common is chang, the adjective meaning long, but it also can mean, it can be a verb meaning to grow. So that's what's up with this character. Next, we have Korneel on level 17 complete. He says, hi, I've been on the course since August, so about 9 months, and April was the first month that saw me not skipping a single day of adding at least one lesson. I have a 43-day streak to be precise, and it's all because I'm using an extra app to stay motivated. I've been using Habit Bull for a while now, which is one of the many apps that help build or kick habits. I found it to be extremely useful to get some speed in my progress. It would be amazing if the course had its own streak feature. It's literally the only thing I can think could make this otherwise perfect course better. Yeah, I would love to have streaks set up. We might be able to set that up with the new flashcard software that we have coming up down the pike. Of course, it's not finished yet. We're hopefully getting to the beta test soon, and we'll be able to consider that. First, we're just going to make sure it's functional, and then once we have that functionality going, we'll try to look at getting some streaks going. There's no streak function in the Kajabi platform, which is where the course actually runs, but it's more important that you have your streaks when it comes to reviewing. So we'll look into that and see if we can get streaks going, and I'm glad to see that you've used an app that helps you with that. Habitable I've heard of, Habitica is another one, getting your daily dose of doing a habit is really, hugely helpful. Next, we have Philip Dong on Make a Movie for De. And this is the character De or Day, depending on the context. So he says, in this sentence, 今天是我妈妈的生日，我得早一点下班给她买个蛋糕. Could it also be written as 今天是我妈妈的生日，我得早一点下班买个蛋糕给她. So basically, the difference between the two sentences is just where the placement of 给她 is, which means to give to her. And actually, both are okay. As we actually cover this in our grammar point about the character gay, which means to give. It can also be a preposition meaning with or to, depending on the context. But, the sentence here is, the first one is 我得早一点下班给他买 or 买给他. Like, either one is okay. Or 买个蛋糕给他. My grammar module just tells me that both of these are fine. I hear both of them in various circumstances. So yeah, you can move them around if you want. Matt Shubert on Make a Movie for T. He says, it's still wild that a character this dense with strokes is not only decipherable now, but I consider it easy to write, say, and understand. Sometimes I have these moments in the course that really hit home how well this method works. Yeah, 问题的题, and this is just a character that means topic, essentially. You can have a 题目is the topic of your, say, thesis or something like that. And that's it's pretty cool. Like, you can absolutely use the Mandarin Blueprint method to make a complex character like this that says, you see, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 strokes, right? And that is, easy to remember if you use the Mandarin Blueprint method. In fact, there's only 2 props that you need to remember for this. So excellent stuff from Matt. Next, we have another from Matt Shubert on Vocab Unlocked from 见, 看见, 见面, 再见, 明天见. This seems as good a place as any to ask a long-standing question I've had. Is there any meaningful difference between 看见 and 看到? I understand both of them are verb result 2-character verbs, but I can't seem to decipher any difference in when to use them. Thanks. No difference, really. They are just to see successfully. So, or to look successfully, I guess is the better way. Because when you look, like, I always think of this. It's like there's a shooting star in the sky and you look to see it. But if you missed it, you missed it. But if you did see it, you looked first and then you saw it streaking across the sky. So that's the difference between looking and seeing. That's the difference between 看 and 看见 or 看到. In both of those cases, it's just a result. So simple enough. Chris Lewis on Mandarin tones, third tone. I finally got around to starting this course and glad I did, as I've already learned something new about third tone. Thanks, guys. Really interesting and will undo some mistakes now. Yeah, the pronunciation mastery course is super helpful for getting a lot of the early mistakes dealt with. It's pretty remarkable. And of course, I know that Chris had learned some Chinese, but depending on your source of learning Chinese, pronunciation may or may not be enough of a focus. So, and for those of you who are past the pronunciation mastery course, it's always a good idea to go back there and make sure that you're saying things properly. Casie Moen on Make a Movie for Dan. This character has the same pronunciation and tone as the previous character, and the written character is very similar too. Yeah, the only difference between these two characters is that this Dan, which means B-U-T, the conjunction but, has the person component on the left. the character previous to it, which is like basically like daybreak. That's literally the sun coming over the horizon. It's a pictograph. And that's also pronounced dan. It just doesn't have the person component. And so continuing, she says, should I be doing anything to make sure my stories for the two aren't overlapped too much, or is it okay if I kind of share a story between the two? I'm guessing in spoken Mandarin, context clues will help me differentiate between the two, but at this stage, how much should I be doing to keep the two characters distinct in my mind? Yeah, so I don't think it's actually all that necessary to worry about this. Maybe emphasize the person component, which is the primary difference. And of course, the right side component is the entire character. So it's like, say, maybe a rooster versus the previous scene has the sun and a razor blade. And then this scene would be the person component, maybe Chuck Norris, and Rooster. So there's going to be different props. So that alone should be enough to make you distinguish between the characters. It, of course, would be the same actor in the same set in the same room. But then it comes down to what are these characters used in, and 但是, and 但, meaning the conjunction but, is so common, you're going to see it all the time. And then the dan, meaning daybreak, doesn't come up all that often. Probably the most common is 元旦, which means New Year. 元旦节 is New Year's Day. And so that's probably the most common word you'll see it in. It's not a super frequent character. We mostly teach that character to get you to the high frequency character, dan, meaning but. But. Jonathan Evans on It's a Word for qi. Is there a time where I don't need to remember each character by its story or prop? In my head, is there a time where I read directly? Right now, I cannot see the future. Absolutely, Jonathan. So one, you naturally forget your scenes. I mean, maybe not, you won't forget literally 100% of them, but the scenes are essentially bridging the gap between not knowing anything about Chinese to seeing the character in context. Once you see the character enough in context, you'll memorize it forever. And at that point, your brain kind of tends to naturally forget the scene because it doesn't need it anymore. And qi is in phase 1 of the course. So it, or maybe it's the beginning of phase 2, but you don't start reading characters in context until you reach phase 3, which is also known as level 13. So that's when you start taking the characters you've learned, putting them together into comprehensible sentences, and then starting to read them in context. But you need to know, I mean, at that point, you know 104 characters. That's about the minimum you can learn and still easily be able to function, because it's quite difficult to make sentences with only 105 characters that are comprehensible and make sense and have any kind of reasonable meaning to them. But that's what starts happening in phase 3, so just keep on trucking and you'll get there. Kate Gans on level 38 complete. She says, thanks for adding the traverse.link URL to show progress made in each level. Sending the link to family and friends for them to see my progress is easier than sending a file. Yeah, this is referring to the new way of tracking your progress that we've put into the level reviews. At the beginning of every level review, there's a link that says click here to see your overall word progress. And we did this so that we can more easily add characters and words to the course and update the level reviews without having to re-export all of these different PDF files. It was a very kind of like, you know, a smart website link versus a dumb PDF. You know, having to do everything manually was just far too time consuming to be reasonable. So now we've switched it to being more link-based and website-based, so I'm glad to hear that you're finding that useful, Kate. Chris Lewis on Vocab Unlocked from 总是. How do you get Snape from 总是? Or is it just a link I make in my mind? I love the movies. Well, that's 总是means always. There's this very emotional scene in the Harry Potter movies where Snape says, Dumbledore says to Snape, still after all these years, you feel love for Lily Potter, even though she's, you know, long since passed away. And he answers always and creates the Patronus charm to show that he still is in love with her because his Patronus is a doe, which relates to Lily Potter. So that's a quite emotional scene in the final Harry Potter film. So that's why we come up with the connection to Snape, because he says always. Chris Lewis on 来自 in context. I imagine Lorenzo going to the zoo in the backyard of my childhood home and lying down next to Zivon who's inside the lion cage, scared of course, and saying, "Where did you come from?" I'm using zi as the mnemonic for zoo and zivan. This is interesting. I mean, you don't have to necessarily do the backyard of your childhood home for a living link. So you use the backyard of your childhood home for some kind of fourth tone that doesn't have a final for an individual character. But Lai Zi is not an individual character, it's two characters. So we're talking about a living link to a compound word. So this is an important distinction to make. Any two-character word does not require the Hanzi movie method. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't think about mnemonic devices to remember the word, but it's not, as we explained in the Phase 2 Living Links lessons, which if you haven't seen those, Chris, any of the new Vocabulary Unlocked lessons from Phase 2 cover techniques for learning two-character or more words. And it's possible you missed those because we only recently updated them a couple of weeks ago. So in Phase 2, all of the new Vocab Unlocked lessons go into a lot of detail about this. The main thing to understand is there is a distinction between how you learn individual characters versus how you learn two-character or more words. It's not as complicated to learn two-character or more words. And so hopefully that will help. Robert Carver on Vocab Unlocked from Xiang. 影响 might be my favorite word so far. Shadow sound to mean influence. What an awesome way to convey that meaning. To remember the word, I think of worm tongue from the Lord of the Rings movies. Leaning over like a shadow to whisper into the ear of the king to influence him. Yeah, I love that connection. And yeah, that's a really cool word. 影响. Because influence is in and of itself not very solid. It's something that is subtle. It's like a shadow. It's not something you can really nail down. The sound of a shadow, right? It's not like, oh, that guy, gave me a basketball to practice with. He handed me a basketball. It's like, okay, there's your influence there. But then there's like more subtle influence. And that's kind of what worm tongue represents. I love that. El Karran on Pick a Prop for E, razor blade, cigars, and lead pipes. Isn't the etymology of E just a result of old school counting methods using sticks on the ground? Isn't not just a one stick on the ground? ER is two sticks, san is three sticks, literally a representation of three sticks. I don't know, that's how it always made sense to me, an early representation of abstract numbers. Nothing wrong with thinking of it like that. The key here is to understand that ER and san are just the beginning of starting a longer process of learning how the Hanzi movie method works. I think the key here is to understand that, yes, ER and san are super easy. Of course they are. They're just one stroke, two stroke, three strokes to represent 1, 2, and 3. But you're not yet aware of how they fit into the larger process of the Hanzi movie method when you're at this point. So if you want to think of them as three sticks, that's fine. But like the key is to remember that this is not the end of the Hanzi movie method. This is clearly just the beginning. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. Hank Elliott on Vocab Unlocked from Tai bu qi tou. Google says can't afford to look up. Mandarin Blueprint says feeling shame or inferior equals not being able to look up or can't face the world. Beautiful and simple. I love Chinese. Right. So tai tou is this. Right now I'm di tou and right tai tou. Tai tou, to lift up your head, right? So if you tai bu qi tou, so tai bu qi means I'm unable to lift my head. So I'm so ashamed that tai bu qi tou, I can't even lift it because there's too much shame, right? And so that's the idea behind that. And yes, it is quite poetic to put it that way. Kairi Shikari on Vocab Unlocked from Nuan, which means like warm. I encountered Nuan Huo in the Pimsleur audio course recently. However, it was pronounced Nuan He instead. It seems a search online reveals either pronunciation can appear, can either be used, or do they have slightly different meanings. There's no difference in meaning. I hear Nuan Huo way more often. Nuan He is, I don't think I can recall anybody ever saying it that way. He, of course, is the primary pronunciation of that particular character, but usually people will refer to the air or the environment being warm as 暖和, so that's what I would say about that. Richard Krause on Vocab Unlocked from Ji. It appears that Ji in the first sentence, 这面包真的是既便宜又好吃，你在哪里买的呢? has the meaning both. Is that right? Well, sort of. So you can say 又便宜又好吃, or you can say 既便宜又好吃. So 既 is working in conjunction with 又 to list two adjectives. That's how you say something has two characteristics. You put 既 adjective, 又 adjective, or 又 adjective, 又 adjective. And then that's a way of listing two adjectives that apply to one thing. So that's it. That's pretty much how that works. So you could translate that as this bread is really both cheap and delicious. That's fine to translate it like that. It just doesn't always, thinking of it as translating as both is less helpful, I think, than thinking of it as working in conjunction as with 又 to give two descriptions of one thing. Jason Pan on 上车 in context. 下雨天出门就上车也不怕雨很方便. First time seeing 天 meaning when it's in 下雨天. Is this just similar to 的时间 or 当时 among a couple others I've seen? Well, I mean, I think you're overthinking it. 下雨天, well, 天 means day. So a day of rain, a rainy day. That may not have been how we translated it. It might have translated as when it's raining, but just try not to rely too much on the translations. See if you can figure it out yourself, because it's pretty straightforward. 天 means day. 下雨天 means the days when it's raining, rainy day, right? So it's not it's easy to overthink. I think that's just try to look a little bit more at the characters and think about what it's saying. Here's another one from Jason Pan on 上车 in context. 很多车都不让宠物上车. Was a bit thrown off by this one. I thought the subject was cars and the object pets. A lot of cars don't let pets in the car, though the translation looks to me that pets are the subject. What am I missing? I don't think you're missing anything, Jason. I think it's just that we ask our translators to give the real meaning. And so if you were to give the literal translation of this, it would be many cars don't let pets get on them, which doesn't make sense. Cars can't do anything to anyone. They're not sentient, right? But the implication of this sentence is that the drivers of the cars don't let pets onto in or onto the car. And so the translator just decided to go with pets aren't allowed on or in a lot of vehicles, which is fine. It's the same meaning. Whether or not it's a subject or object first is not really relevant to the meaning of the sentence. We've got 很多车, so many cars 都不让, all don't let 宠物 pets 上车 get in the car, right? So you could translate that literally, but then you have this weird thing where a car is making a pet get in or on the car, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So the translator decided to say pets aren't allowed in a lot of vehicles, which is fine. I mean, the meaning is the same. So again, I understand getting thrown off by it, but just try to remember that you can just look at the Chinese characters and understand the meaning of it. You don't always need the English translation to get the meaning out of it. And in the intermediate course, there won't be English translations. So you're in level 30 now. It's probably a good time to start relying a little bit less on them. Rebecca Wheble on Vocab Unlocked from 写. So the sentence is 在大家的协助下. Hi, could you please explain what the 下 does in this phrase? So I've linked to two Loom videos here that explain the 在 something plus 下 shang 中 li why, these very different directional based characters that you put after an object, and you put the object after 在. So you have 在 object or place or action, and then you have 上 or 下. And so in this case, 在大家的协助下, under the under the help of everyone, you might say tutelage, under the tutelage of my teacher, as an example. Why do we say under there? because we're trying to get across the idea that there's this overarching thing that's happening. And so in these videos, I go into more detail about how you can use them with different parts, but this 在 plus something plus 下 is a very common structure that you'll see, and you can check out the 2 videos to get more examples in the show notes. Jason Pan on 汽车 in context. 我又什么时候能买得起汽车呢? Can you help me break down this sentence to understand 买得起? Having trouble understanding how it means afford to buy. Well, 买 means buy, 起 is to rise, so 买起. That's not something you're going to say very often without something in the middle. You'll usually say 买得起 or 买不起. But the idea is that if you can 买起 something, it means you can do it. You can buy it. Like the buying has come to be. The buying is, has come to be risen. So remember that when you put 的 or 不, these are infixes, meaning that the result can be achieved from the verb or the result cannot be achieved from the verb. So 买得起 means you can afford it. You can buy it. So that the other way to say can buy something is afford, right? And then 买不起, the result of, buying coming about, 买起, cannot be achieved, 不,买不起, right? So the sentence here, 我又什么时候能买得起汽车呢? And the 又什么时候, like the 又 there is emphasizing like negation, right? So it's like, it's a rhetorical question. They're saying, so when on earth am I going to be able to afford a car, right? So it's probably somebody whose wages are really low and they can't get close to buying a car. So 我又什么时候能买得起汽车呢? So that's the idea there. Jason Pan on 连 in context. 他连看都没看我. What's the purpose of the second 看 in this sentence? Thanks. So 他连看都 is a set grammatical phrase, which means even looking. So she won't even look at me is basically the sentence here. And it doesn't translate directly. So 他连看都没看我. So 没看我 didn't look at me and didn't even look at me. She didn't even look at me is the translation that's correct for this. And the way you describe things like this, you say 连看都没看 or 连吃都没吃. So like I made this guy food and he didn't even eat it. 我给他做饭他连吃都没吃饭, right? And it's just a way of getting across the idea of even. It's an emphasis. You could just say 他没看我, right? But if you want to say like she didn't even look at me, like maybe you were trying to get her attention, it's like 他连看都没看我, right? So it's the 连看都 is where the emphasis falls. Because again, you take that away, it's still a grammatically correct sentence. 他没看我. She didn't look at me. And you want to say, but she didn't even look at me. 连看都没看我. Right? So that's the idea there. You'll see it come up a lot more often as you move forward. Jason Pan on 辆 in context. This is the measure word for cars. 1年以前他买了一辆红色的电动车，然后骑到我家楼下给我看. In this sentence, does 楼下 suggest that she rode the e-bike to the basement part of the house or street level? No, 楼下 is the street level. It just means downstairs, right? And so you can think of it like that. If you want to say the basement, you would say 负一楼. So 负 means negative. 负一楼 means the basement level 1, so the negative first level. 负二楼, so like if you're in a mall or something, there's often more than one basement level because you'll have like basement 1 is where, you've got some more shops, but then on basement 2, that's where the parking is or whatever. So it's basically 一楼 is the street level. 负一楼 is the first basement level. 负二楼, and you can go, maybe a place has 7 basement levels, 负七楼, it just means that it's 7 levels below 一楼, which is street level. So 一楼, street level, and then 负, this negative character, you can see it it can be used in the word negative as opposed to positive, 负面. So the negative aspect, 负面. Or a lot of people talk about 正能量, which means positive energy. But you can also have 负能量, which is negative energy. So 负 is the opposite of 正. 正 meaning positive. So they're kind of positive and negative as antonyms there. Matt Shubert on 多么 in context. Is there any meaning or emphasis difference for when you use 有 before 多么? I thought maybe it was an adjective versus verb thing, but in the sample sentences, there's 2 examples with adjectives. Subject plus 多么好看. Subject plus 有多么可爱. And 2 with verbs. Subject 多么爱. Subject 有多么爱. I do understand the idea of more input leading to natural understanding of what sounds right or wrong to use, but in this case, I really don't get the 有 here. So, the 有多么 is in a longer form bit of content that comes, I believe, in level 22 or 23, and it's about why a lot of people don't want to have kids these days, and it goes through some of the negatives of having kids, but then it ends with, the thing that we kind of all know about having kids, which is that despite all the responsibility that they are, you end up really just loving them, and that's what gets you through. So here's the few sentences. 你也只有一页一页认真的教他们. So you can only, again, this is picking it up the story midstream, but it's basically saying like, you have to page by page teach them. 还有 also, 他们考得好的话, if they test well, 你还得送他们现金或者一些很贵的东西. If they test well, you'll have to give them some kind of either cash or some kind of very expensive thing. And then finally, here's the final sentence. 不过, but, 你慢慢也会发现, you'll slowly discover 这些小东西有多么可爱. Just how lovable these little things are. 你有多么爱他们. Just how much you love them. And so it doesn't necessarily translate as have to say 你有多么爱他们. It's more like saying just how much you love them, right? You'll discover that. 你多么爱他们 is how you love them so much. 你有多么爱他们, just how much you love them. It kind of translates like that. And so, again, it's not a perfect direct translation, as many things aren't, but that's the idea there. It makes sense to me looking back on it. Like, when I read that, I was like, yeah, sure. You could say 你有多么爱他们. So I am going to fall back a little bit on it makes sense if you have enough of your input there. And so the difference is subtle, but it does make sense to me. Next, we have Matt Shubert on 宝贝 or 宝贝儿 in context. This isn't related to the lesson we're on, but I was curious about 称呼 in this sentence. 他喜欢称呼他女朋友宝贝儿. Would the same meaning be achieved by saying 他喜欢叫他女朋友宝贝儿? Or is 叫 more of a passive verb? Is it like is called? She is called baby. While 称呼 is an active version of that verb, like call. He calls her baby. I like where you're thinking with this, but you could say it. 他喜欢叫他女朋友宝贝儿. That's fine. Because the sentence makes it clear that it doesn't mean 叫 as in like make her or passive calling. So 称呼 is just it's just slightly more formal. But people do say it a lot. 我应该怎么称呼你? How should I address you? This is a thing that's very polite to say to somebody who's, say, like, maybe older than you or their social status is different than yours and you're not sure. You can say, 我应该, how should, I should, 我应该怎么, how should I, 称呼, address, 你, you. So, 我应该怎么称呼你? Very useful phrase. But in this case, you could use 叫 as well. Jason Pan on 高 in context. 多吃还可以长得更高. Does 长得 imply growing as well? Sure, 长. The character means to grow. 长得怎么样? 长得高. right? So yeah, it definitely means grow. Can this also be said with 变得? Sure, because 变得 is a little bit broader, right? So it's just change. 多吃还可以，还可以变得高，变得更高. Yeah, that's fine. But 长得 is a little bit more specific because it's, you grow to be tall, right? Kairi Shikari on Vocab Unlocked from Da. Is the main difference between 达到 and 到达something like reaching something abstract, expectation, goal, etc., versus reaching an actual destination, or are they interchangeable? No, you got it right. They're not really interchangeable because 到达 is the formal way of saying arrive, and it's usually at a location. The most common place I hear this is in like the equivalent of Uber in China. The phone will say 你已经到达目的地, 到达目的地, which means arrived at your destination, right? And so that's very clear. It's a literal thing that you've arrived in space to that definition. Whereas 达到 is usually, like you said, reaching something more abstract, a goal or an expectation. So 达 has that feeling of like overcoming, like the reaching to overcome the thing that you're trying to get to. And so 达到, 达到目标, reach your goal. So yeah, it's the difference. The primary difference is just abstract versus concrete. Xiao En on 记 in context. In the sentence, 我记下你的电话了. Isn't that 电话 is the phone itself, but phone number is 电话号码, or 电话 can both mean the phone and the phone number to Chinese people. Yeah, 电话 is such a useful word because it applies to so many things. Yeah, sure, 电话号码 is the more common word for phone number. I mean, or I should say, is the literal word for phone number. But people will say 电话 to refer to the phone call. They'll say 电话 to refer to the phone, and they'll often say 电话 to refer to the phone number. It's all context. So, yes, that's the situation. And there's another one from Xiao En on 记 in context where he says, in the sentence, 儿子总是记不住我说的话. I thought 不 comes before the action and verb it negates. Should it not be 不记? Or it could go either before or after the action it negates. So what I'd recommend, Xiao En, is for you to watch the 8th part of the word structure series, which you should be able to find in the sidebar of the course when you're on your computer, because that covers affixes. And there's an infix for 不. So 记不住 means unable to remember. So 不记 just means didn't remember. I mean, and you usually say 忘了, I forgot, right? Because that's what unable to, or I didn't remember. But 记不住 means unable to remember. When you put a verb plus a result, 记 is the verb to remember. 住 means to set it in place in your mind. So 记住 is a memory, is a memorize, right? So 记不住 means cannot achieve the result of 住, which is to like stick it in place, have it live in your mind, because 住 means live. So 记住 means to memorize, to remember so that it lives in your brain, right? But if you say 记得住, that would mean you can remember something. It's possible to memorize something. And 记不住 means it's impossible to memorize that thing. So check out the part 8 of the word structure series on affixes. That will cover this section in the infixes section. Christine on Vocab Unlocked from Chu. Just following on to Soren's comment, though, the supposed meaning that the sentence is supposed to convey for this word is administrative division. Here's the sentence. 很多城市都在大力发展他们的高新区. So where is the administrative division in this sentence? Surely the meaning of the sentence is zone, 是不是? So I like this question because I actually live in the Gaoxin区of Chengdu, which is the high-tech zone, but it totally is an administrative division. So every city has different districts in China, and so they're usually labeled with something relevant to the history of the area. For example, I used to live in Chengdu in the district known as Jinjiangqu, which is the reason it's called that is because the Jin River runs through it. So Jiang means river, Jinjiang is the Jin River. And that's where I lived for a while. And then I moved to the Gaoxinqu, which is kind of a mix of an administrative division. It has a police department. It has courts. It has, people who are in charge of the administration of this particular district in Chengdu, but it's also a common area in many Chinese cities that are specifically about having tech incubators and having like computer software parks, and it's where they put a lot of the money into different investments and business. There's usually a lot of skyscrapers in these areas, and so that's the Gaoxinqu, and because many cities have it, that's what the sentence means. 很多城市, many cities, are all 大力发展. So they're working hard to develop 他们的高新区, their high-tech zones. So while zone is definitely like a useful word here, the zone is also a administrative division. So there are synonyms in this case. Chris Lewis on required sentences versus optional sentences. This may not be the right place to ask this, but looking in the required sentences and came across this one. 猪妈妈担心地说. I understand all but why the D is before the 说. Is it a mistake or gives some special meaning? It's not a mistake. We wrote an article about when this character D is pronounced D. And when is it pronounced D? When you're trying to say how a verb happened. So 说, 猪妈妈说, the mama pig said, versus 猪妈妈担心地说, the mama sheep or the mama pig nervously said, worriedly said, right? So it turns adjectives into adverbs, or it can turn verbs into adverbs depending. But usually it's adjectives into adverbs. So 开心 means happy, 开心的 means happily. So you can think of whatever adjective you want. If you put it as d and connect it to a verb, it means adjectively doing that verb or adverbly doing that verb. So that's how the d situation works. Chris Lewis on Vocab Unlocked from 总是. He says a good living link for this one is Always on My Mind, a song by the Pet Shop Boys we used to always dance to in the late 80s and early 90s. There was a particular young woman who was always on my mind back in those days. She's the new image. Fair enough. Yeah, you got the always on my mind. That's a great connection because it has the word always in the title. And then you even came up with a couple of extra ways to apply always to that. So 总是 means always. Good living link connection there. I like it. Carrie Woods on Vocab Unlocked from 样,一样,什么样,样子. For the same, I had to use that meme of the two Spider-Men pointing at each other. It was too good. Yeah, we all know that meme, right? The two Spider-Men pointing at each other, and people will often apply different words to it of, like two groups that are actually acting in the same way, and they're like blaming each other, which is, it's great. Also, a tree sheep teaching style had me laughing a lot. Yeah, for Young's, sure. Absolutely. So that's a good couple of living link connections for the character Yang. That'll be it for this week's Mandarin Blueprint podcast. Remember, if you'd like to help us get the advanced course finished as quickly as possible, donate to our GoFundMe, which is at the beginning of the show notes for this episode. You can also send us a donation via PayPal. This will help us get the advanced course out sooner rather than later. And again, if it would be any financial burden to donate, please do not. But if you happen to have some extra cash lying around and you know that you want the advanced course sooner rather than later, let's see if we can hit our goal. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.